Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about a book that I've written. It's a memoir called Fool Me Twice, and it's a story about my life with a focus on my journey internet dating, where I was scammed and injured in the process. It's an educational book that will help many other people not to get caught in the same trap that I was. I'd like to also take this opportunity to play my book promo for you. Here it is.
From life on a farm in rural Australia, where wide open spaces made a young woman yearn to know what was beyond her country town. She moved to the city, became a mother, and found her dream career which took her across the world. But still, something was missing. In her search for love, she traveled far, trusted deeply. She wanted so badly to find someone that she almost lost herself in the process and learned some hard lessons along the way. Fool Me Twice, a new memoir by Jules Hannaford. Available August 20th on Amazon.
Today I'm here with Rebecca Hopkins again. Hi.
Yeah.
Thank
Hi,
you so
Jules.
much. It's great to see you again.
And you?
We only talked for about 4 hours last time and we didn't get it all covered.
We may do the same again.
So, yes, I have nothing else on. I knew I was meeting you, so it's all good. Rebecca, last time I met with you was episode 31, Own Your Story, and you talked a lot about vulnerability and gave us a little bit about your life story. But today we're here to talk more specifically about your fertility journey, and we're here to speak more specifically about your fertility journey and egg donation.
Yes.
How did you know that you were infertile?
I met my husband when I was 27, and we'd been together a couple of years when I started wanting to have kids, around about 29. But we'd only been together a couple of years. He's 4 years younger than me. And
Ooh, cradle snatcher.
so I remember saying to him, we were living in Melbourne at the time, and I remember saying to him, so can you give me a number out of 1 to 10 on how close you are to wanting to have kids? And he was like, yeah, I'm at about a 3. And I was like, okay, I'm at a 7. I'll check back in with you in 6 months. 6 months later, he was at a 4 and I was at a 9. And so this was the process of like trying to get us aligned with wanting to have kids.
That's a really cool way of doing it, actually. What
I
a
didn't
great
want to be
idea.
like a needy girlfriend who was like, I must have children. But I was feeling that.
Right.
For some reason, I didn't ever think I wanted to have kids. And then at 29, I was like, I must have a child. It was really strange. And then by the time I was 31, it was the time where I was, look, I'm 10 out of 10 now. Where are you at? And he said, no, I'm good. I'm ready. He said, but I want to get married first. And I was like, okay, then let's get married. And he's like, okay. And I was like, Googled, how soon can you get married? And it was like in a month. So we got married.
In a month?
Yeah, we
Oh my
did. We
gosh.
Googled a celebrant. We had this small wedding in Melbourne and we were married. And so we started trying to have kids the day we got married. That was why I wanted to get married.
That's why you got married so quickly. What a way to do it.
I wanted to do things in order. I was neither here nor there about being married and having kids. Anyway, so we started trying to have kids, and after the first year, we hadn't fallen pregnant. So I went and saw the doctor first, just on my own, and they did some general tests and said everything was fine. And the advice is to go away and have sex every second day for a month, which my husband and I are like, yeah, let's do that. And then like after 2 weeks of it, I was like, again? Like this is, it's harder than you think. And then sometimes it would fall on a Friday night and Adam would be like, I'm going out for drinks. And I'd be like, you can't, you have to come home and have sex. And he's like, really? We made fun of the experience because it was a little bit ridiculous and still no luck. Then went to see a doctor and they talked to us about IVF and the options that we had there. And we'd seen advertisements of IVF clinics and they've always got a picture of a baby in there. So you're like, IVF equals having a baby. At this point, I was 33 and we went to a seminar and learnt about IVF and then went and spoke to our doctor about it. The first thing the doctor does when struggling to have kids is called a laparoscopy. So they test Adam's sperm to see if he's got any problems, and he didn't have any problems. Then they do a laparoscopy, which is going in keyhole surgery to have a look at my uterus to see if there's any problems there and to check if fallopian tubes are blocked, all of that, kind of an investigative procedure. Did all of that and everything was fine. Then they check your hormones. And my hormones were okay. So there's a particular test which can tell you how close you are to menopause. And so from 0 to 60, 60 being you're in menopause, 0 to 12 is like your fertile range.
I'm 85.
Yeah, so I'm there now. Like I'm like 100 and something. But at the time it was like 12. So I wasn't.
Okay, so you weren't.
No,
yeah.
So I was still fertile. So we decided to go down the IVF route.
Did they explain to you why you weren't able to conceive? They couldn't work it out?
No, they couldn't. My sister had gone through menopause at 31, so she couldn't have children. And they assumed it was something probably related to that. But everything came back fine. And we started the IVF.
Oh, okay. And how did that feel as a young woman, newly married and not being able to conceive?
I wasn't so worried about it to start off with because I just thought we'll just do IVF and we'll have a baby. Some people need help. That's okay. I had no shame around using IVF at all. Adam and I both had really long corporate careers, so we had money to spend on it because going through the IVF process isn't cheap. But we'd been putting money away for our children anyway, so that wasn't a problem.
Is it not free in Australia to start with, IVF?
I don't know.
I don't know. If someone wants to email me and let me know. We're stuck in Hong Kong. We're not sure.
There's a government system. So we did it in Melbourne. There is a government and private and public, and there would be a waiting list to go on there. And you have to be a certain age and things like that. But we went private.
So you could get onto it.
So we could just get straight onto it. And the process of going through IVF, like there's different protocols. Some are longer, some are shorter. The first one I went on, they put you on the pill for a couple of weeks to start off with. And then you go on a cocktail of hormones. So there's a nasal spray that just sent me crazy. I remember being in Medicare. This is how I knew that I'd lost my shit. I was like in Medicare lining up for some reason in Australia. And there was a woman standing next to me and I was sitting down and she'd said some offhand remark like, well, you think someone would give you a chair when you're waiting to fill in a form. And so I said to her, you think you'd ask if you wanted a chair? And I was like, oh my gosh. I was just mean. And then my number popped up and then I kind of ran out of there. And I spoke to a couple of other friends who were going through IVF and they were like, is that the nasal spray? And my friend said to me, she said, I went into David Jones with 5 items and she said I could only have 4 in the changing rooms. And so she shouted at her. And so we all had these stories of where we've just lost our shit when these hormones had kind of taken over our body. Anyway, so you have the pill, then there was a nasal spray, and then you start stomach injections.
Did you have to do them yourself?
Yeah, you can go in and have them done. It depends on your tolerance for needles. I've got a really high tolerance for pain and needles. I'm okay with watching them go in. My husband has the complete opposite. Like he couldn't look. I made him do one once for me and he's like nearly passed out. So I was like, I'll take it from here. You put these hormones in your body and basically what they're trying to do is you have a bunch of follicles every month and naturally one of them will mature and then an egg's released, which is your opportunity to fall pregnant. That's the normal way your body works. What they do in IVF is they put a hormone in you to grow more follicles, as many as possible, so they can then extract as many as they can for an IVF round and then fertilise them. You naturally would only have one that would mature. With this drug, you'd have, usually they're aiming for between 15 and 30.
All right. How many did you get?
1 the first time.
Only 1. And did they explain to you why?
No, they just upped the hormone. So that was the moment. So I was all really upbeat about IVF to start off with. And Adam and I had gone into that first scan. So you go in and they scan your ovaries and they see how many follicles. And I remember going in there and saying to Adam, 15 would be great, but 30 would be awesome, but I'll settle for 15. And they did the scan, and I think there was 2 at the time. And I remember just looking at Adam and trying not to cry. And we walked out of there. And I remember we both had to go back to work, and he put his hand on my arm and I said, don't. I can't even talk to you about this. And we both just sat in the car in silence, and he went back to work and I went back to work. And that's the moment that I realised that this was not going to be an easy journey for us at all.
How did you feel?
That was probably the start of my grief, because I'd seen the posters and they said, I thought it was like if we had enough cash,
you could get a baby.
We could get a baby. Like, that's what I thought. Yeah. And then when that happened, I was like, I'm not sure this is actually the path for us.
Why did you decide on IVF? Did you discuss IUI or adoption or anything else?
No, at this point it was about us having our own baby. Like, that was the goal. We weren't at a place to even think about adoption then. There's kind of a process you go through, and the first thing you're going to do is try with your own eggs and your own sperm to start off with. And IVF to me was almost like just a faster way of getting through the process.
Yeah, especially when you thought it was a guarantee.
Oh, I totally thought it was guaranteed. And that's how most people go into it. And there are seminars filled, information sessions you go to, hundreds and hundreds of people that are all thinking that this is going to be the answer. And for the majority of people, it usually is. First 1 or 2 rounds and you usually have success. But for us, that wasn't the case.
Did they implant that one follicle that they found, or did you have to harvest some more?
No. So they extracted 2 eggs, 1 fertilized, and then they put that one back in, and I didn't fall pregnant.
Oh, okay.
And so then you go back to the doctor's office and they said, we'll just do another round. So again, you start back at the beginning and more injections, and they upped the amount of hormone they were putting in. And the second round, I got 0.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. How was that? Were you prepared, though, this time for not very many?
I was prepared for not very many, but 0 was still hard.
Devastating, yeah.
Because the extraction process isn't straightforward. So I think I had 2 follicles and they got 0 eggs out of them. And so I remember waking up, because you're under anaesthetic for it. I remember waking up in the bed and they come and tell you how many eggs they've got. And so I knew it was like 2, 1 or 0. And said 0. And I had this chirpy girl in the bed next to me who was like got 16 eggs. And she was like, they were like 16. They were all having a party. And he comes and says, yeah, none. And I was like, can I have a private room, please? It was,
really?
Yeah. I just needed to get away
from her.
Yeah. And that was when it started to really hit home. So I did 6 more tries with that.
Did you?
Yeah.
You kept trying. And how many did you get each time?
None.
What?
I know. And do you know what? The doctor didn't tell us to stop. And I remember my husband sitting in the doctor's office and saying to him, I don't understand. And the doctor, and he's a senior doctor who's like, we're paying him lots of money. He said, neither do I. And so I went for a second opinion, which was another completely other clinic. And this was this South African woman who was like a talk it straight. And she's like, you need to stop. Like, I don't know why you're still trying with your own eggs. Like, this isn't going to happen for you. And that was the first time someone had been straight with me.
What did that feel like? Was that a relief because someone had at least given you the truth?
Yeah. You don't want to stop because you think it may happen.
Yeah, especially when all the professionals are encouraging you. But I guess, were they just wanting your money?
I don't know.
Or did they just think that maybe some miracle might happen?
I think sometimes it's hard to have that conversation with a patient, that maybe some doctors like the patients to work that out for themselves and get to their own natural conclusion, whereas I just needed someone to tell me. So I was really appreciative that she did. And then the next conversation was, you'll need to use donor eggs.
And what was that? What was that like?
I said no.
Did you even know that was a possibility?
No, I didn't.
Right.
And I said, no, that's not for me at all. And she said, look, go away and have a think about it. The good thing about the Australian system is there's counsellors. And so you have someone through this process talking to you about how you feel emotionally about it. And we had an amazing counsellor. We went back and saw her and she said, look, let's put the options on the table. I'll give you some homework to do and you and Adam go away and talk about it, and then you can come back and we'll talk about what you've discovered. And she gave us this activity where she said, I want you to make 2 lists, one adoption versus egg donation, and just take sticky notes and brainstorm how you feel about each one of those from both yours and Adam's perspective. And she said, the other one I want you to do is kids and no kids.
And that's really good advice, isn't it?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was so good. And we're really diligent homework people. Like, we did our homework. Lots of people don't. And we're like, right. So
let's go.
So we got the sticky notes out, and I remember sticking it up in the kitchen with Adam and really unearthing some stuff that we hadn't talked about. It was really beautiful that I wanted. So on the egg donation versus adoption, I was more keen on having his genetic child, even if it wasn't my genetic child, than I was adopting. He was more keen to adopt because he felt guilty about being genetically connected to the child and me not. And so we had a really nice discussion around I wanted to be pregnant and I wanted to carry the child. And then we took it back to the counsellor and she kind of worked through that with us. We went to an information session on adoption, and in Australia, there's not that big a need for it, was what we learned.
What do you mean?
Back in the 60s and 70s, children were taken away from single mums and adopted into families with two parents because they thought that was better for the child. Now the systems in Australia aim at keeping the child with the birth parent because that's better for the child, and we have systems in place enable that to happen, which is really great. But that means, therefore, there's not as many children that need to be adopted. There's still some, and there's so many people who want to adopt.
Why do you think your initial reaction was no to egg donorship?
Oh, my ego. Couldn't wrap my head around how that might work. And I went home and I talked about it. I'm really open and I spoke a lot with my friends about it. And I had, my best friend in Perth's like, I'll give you my eggs. And lots of my friends offered. And my head was like, her eggs, Adam's sperm. That's really weird. And I couldn't wrap my head around it.
No, I think that would be harder than having an anonymous egg.
Because then you've got all of the thoughts about that person, and it's really complex psychologically as well. And so we kind of just put that aside and just said, look, we'll park that for now. It was still in our minds that we might consider it. And it's a process, right? So my first initial reaction is no. And then I start to think about the bigger picture, and we were both committed to having a family no matter what. So fostering we talked about, adoption we talked about, and then egg donation.
From there, you then decided that you'd go ahead with the egg donation?
We talked about it with our families and we'd started kind of exploring it with them, and we hadn't decided that we were going to do it. And then we went to my husband's stepfather's, I think it was his 50th birthday up in Brisbane. And it was a really nice event and we'd met lots of people, and we were living in Melbourne at the time. We flew back the next day and Adam's mum rang and said, we found someone who wants to be your egg donor who was at the party. And we were like, what do you mean? And it was this really nice couple who had 4 children or 5 children already, and she was still relatively young and clearly quite fertile, and they were nice people, and they said she'd love to do it, which is the perfect answer for us because we knew they were good people, but we didn't know them well enough. They weren't part of our social circle.
Perfect, yeah.
And we started to go down that path, so we said yes. And then went through the process. And in Australia, there's different legalities depending on where you are. So Victoria has different rules and laws versus Brisbane. So when it came to preparing for it, we were doing it through a clinic in Melbourne, but she was in Brisbane. And so it was a little bit tricky, but our counsellor had said to us, go up there and spend some time with them and meet the husband and wife together and have a conversation about how you all feel about the wife donating her eggs.
How did that go?
Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. What a weird dinner party.
I know, it was a very weird dinner party because we didn't know them as well.
Yeah.
So we go over to their house, and they've got this lovely house, and their kids are gorgeous. So I'm like looking at the kids, seeing how they are. And they're these lovely children. And so we're sitting at the dinner table and we're talking about the footy for like 30 minutes. And like after a while I said, are we going to talk about the egg donation? And everyone's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, thank goodness.
So, someone said something.
Yeah.
And the wife was really excited about it. The husband was a little more hesitant. I remember him saying, I've got 4 children. I don't want another kid coming and knocking on my door expecting something from us later down the track, which was, I think, was really brave for him to say.
Yeah.
The wife was really excited and really open about it. And we talked whether they would consider them their children or our children, like lots of really important discussions.
Do you think that helped the dad get his head around it more?
I think the fact that he got to share how he felt. I'm not sure whether his was from a financial perspective or I don't know really where he was coming from, but the fact that we were able to openly talk about it all. And then we left there and we started the process.
Wow.
I know. I then got a job up in Brisbane and we relocated. So we all ended up.
Oh, did you? I didn't realise that.
I got a promotion. Yeah, the head office was in Brisbane. So we ended up moving there, which was where my husband's from anyway. So we moved there, which made it a little easier. And we started the process. So what they do is once you've been through all the counselling and you agree that this is how it's going to work, they line up our cycles. So they put us both on hormones. They need to prepare my uterus to accept the embryo. So she will go through the IVF process where they harvest her eggs, they mix them with Adam's sperm, and then they put them back into my uterus.
Wow, so it's pretty hectic for her, and she's got to have all the hormones and everything.
So amazing. Like for people to offer to do that, for like in Australia, you get no compensation for that. It's illegal to pay someone to do it.
Oh, so you couldn't pay them?
You can't pay them. So they'll get their out-of-pocket costs. So any flights they had down to Melbourne and any of their costs are all paid for by us. But
you can't pay them for the service.
And the other important thing about Australia is you can't do anonymous donation. So it's illegal to not know who that person is.
Why do you think that is?
So Australia's really progressive, especially Melbourne. So there's an organisation in Melbourne called VARTA, VARTA. It's the Victorian Assisted Reproductive Technology Authority. It's the government arm that manages the infertility space, the reproductive space. And they are ahead of most of the world when it comes to this stuff. And so what they've learned is that they've learned a lot from adoption and the need for openness when it comes to knowing birth parents. And they've also learned a lot from the stolen generation and that connection to your genetic history and how important that is to identity.
For anyone listening who's not Australian, the stolen generation, Aboriginal children that were taken away from their families when they were young and put into homes or given to white families, and many of them never were able to reconnect again with their families.
Yeah, and
it's very sad.
And identity is huge, especially in the Aboriginal community, but for everyone, having that whole picture of who you are. So what they've done in Australia is they've banned anonymous donation. The UK has banned it. I think Sweden, there's a couple of countries, but we are really leading the way.
Right, interesting, very interesting. So you went ahead with all of that and did you fall pregnant?
So our cycles were all lined up and she was ready to go and they were waiting for my period to start, and it was taking like weeks and weeks and weeks, which was unusual for me.
Did you think you were pregnant?
I didn't, but my husband did.
Right.
And so I remember being out for drinks with him and he's like, why don't you just do a pregnancy test? And I said, no, like I've done enough of those and it's disappointing. And then I ended up doing one the next day and I was. And that loops back to Own Your Own Story, which is when I had Ruby. So I was pregnant.
Oh, so you'd fallen pregnant naturally?
Yeah, I'd fallen pregnant naturally.
You didn't go through the egg donation with this woman because you were pregnant.
And I felt a tremendous amount of guilt because she'd been through so much to do this, but I was pregnant. And then, as you know, from episode 31.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't heard it, can we have a little recap?
Yeah, so I was 7 weeks pregnant when I found out, and it all went along like a really normal pregnancy until my 20-week scan when I found out that our baby had spina bifida and we were told to terminate the pregnancy. So after all of this, we were just
another slap in the face.
Yeah. And I felt like I couldn't go back to the egg donor and ask her. I was in grief and we ended up packing all our stuff up, quitting our jobs and going traveling and spending time in Bali, doing yoga, exploring our grief. And it was there that we kind of had the space to talk about what we might do next. And so we were still interested in egg donation, but we were moving to the UK after that. So we decided just to see what our other options were around egg donation. And then Spain came up as there was kind of 3 countries that were really on our list.
Is that because of you been Googling and researching?
Yeah, it was just total Googling. Spain, South Africa and Greece were kind of the 3 countries that we were keen to be pregnant as soon as we could. So this is the problem, that when you go into egg donation or when you're going through infertility is I felt like I was running out of time. And so I wanted a country that could make it a speedy process. What I didn't think of was how that might affect the unborn child and their perspective. We were very much from let's just pick a country that has short waiting lists, and Spain had really short waiting lists. As soon as we could be there, we could start around. There wasn't any of these counselling loops to jump through like there was in Australia. Now we know why they're there.
What was the negative impact of doing it quickly with Spain?
Decision process was really like, this is how we decided on Spain, which I think is hilarious. So Spain, South Africa and Greece My husband loves rugby and he can't stand the South African rugby team. So South Africa was out.
That's hilarious.
And then Greece. We had no connection to Greece at all, but there was a TV show in Australia, a comedy company that had like...
Yeah, Wogorama of Wogs Out of Work.
Yeah, and it was like Bula. And I go, like it was just, Australia. We made fun of Greeks and it was this... a gentle
Well, they
humour.
made fun of themselves, didn't they?
It was fun.
It was hilarious.
But the Greeks always had these monobrows. Greek women are beautiful. Now I know that, but at the time I had this judgment in my head about it.
Of course, because they parodied themselves so well and they were everywhere, weren't they?
And so we went with Spain. We were moving to the UK, so it was close as well. And so we contacted a couple of clinics. We looked at their reputations and we Skyped. And they have like international units where you can Skype with someone whose English is really good. And the ball just rolled really fast from there.
And was it open or closed egg donation?
So anonymous.
Right, so that's closed egg donation.
The complexities around donation, and we didn't know any of this when we first went into it, is each country has different laws and legalities around open and closed donations or anonymous and open donations. The US has a mix, so they do both anonymous and open. The US was out for us because it's incredibly expensive.
No, I can imagine.
So, because you can legally pay donors there. In Spain, it has to be altruistic, so therefore the costs are lower and it's a fast process. So I have a friend who did use South Africa and she has a sheet of paper that tells her lots of information about their donor and they have an opportunity to do a Skype with the donor, which is a great result if you're going to do egg donation, is having access to the person who donated.
Why?
Because, again, back to what we know from the stolen generation and adoption is that not having a complete understanding and view of your identity and how you were created is not good for the child. We're not saying it's always bad for the child, but what we're seeing in the research is that every child should have access to a full sense of their identity, which means my kids have half genetics of a woman we don't know and we may never get to meet. And so my kids might be okay with that. I'm not assuming that they're not going to be okay, but it shouldn't be a situation where they have to even consider that.
That must be a big issue for you as a parent about talking about it and making them aware. And then do you feel a little bit of loss because you can't give them the full story?
Yeah. So we had counselling back when we were starting the IVF round in Spain. We went and saw a counsellor. We were really diligent.
You didn't have the option of knowing your donor
Not in Spain.
Right.
No,
okay.
they don't.
Okay.
And so our donor might want to know, but the law is very strict. Like Spain is the strictest. So I know our donor was 32 years old when she donated and she's an A+ blood type.
That's it.
That's it.
Not even where she's from.
I don't know whether she can speak English. I don't know what she looks like. We can make some assumptions from our kids that she's got brown eyes because I've got blue eyes, Adam's got green, and one of our children's looks fairly Spanish.
So you use the same donor for all of your children?
Yeah.
So you have 3 children, and 2 were twins.
So
one lot were twins.
So we have Rosie's 5 and Jack and Maggie are 3.5 now, and they're all from the same donor, from the same IVF round.
Oh, okay. So when they harvested the eggs, do you know how many she got?
So the thing I loved about Spain was that it was such an inclusive process. So we saw the pictures of the embryos and the evolution over the 5 days before they put them back and the health of them. And they really talk to you. I mean, you're paying them a lot of money, so they include you in it. Whereas in Australia, it was such a offhand, the process wasn't very warm and inviting at all. And that I loved about Spain. Like I felt in Spain like I was the first woman to ever go through IVF. They just took such good care of me.
Oh, that's nice.
But where their system falls down, and this is my own personal view, is that the anonymity is going to be a problem going forward.
Did you just have the 2 IVF rounds in Spain and conceive both times and had your children? How many did you have?
That would have been nice.
I know, it sounds just too good to be true.
So the first round in Spain, we didn't fall pregnant. And then they gave us a different donor. And the second time, there was 10, I think they harvested 10 eggs. And I remember getting a call and the nurse chirpily told us none had fertilised. And basically she said the sperm ran away from the eggs. So that one was cancelled. And then we had another donor and then I had 2 miscarriages with that donor's eggs, which was awful. At that point, we were ready to give up.
I can't believe your persistence. It's incredible because by now you're already up to 8 lots of insemination.
Yeah,
or
we were
9.
up to 9 by this point.
Unbelievable.
I know. And I remember my first miscarriage. So I'd had Ruby and given birth to her at 20 weeks. So I'd already been through the trauma of that. And then I think it was an 8-week miscarriage was the first one. And I'd kind of downplayed it because I thought, it's nothing compared to giving birth to a baby at 20 weeks. And I remember trying to go back to work the next day after the miscarriage and getting onto a train and just having a panic attack and wanting to get off. I was in London and realising I needed to take care of myself a bit more.
Right. Because that's interesting. It comes back to that comparative suffering thing, doesn't it? And then you're going, well, hey, I should be able to cope with this because I had that massive trauma and this is less of a trauma.
Yeah.
But every trauma can affect you in a different way, no matter how great or how small.
Absolutely. And so then we had a couple of embryos left. By this, actually, we had 3. At this time, they're putting like 3 back into my uterus.
Oh, my God, imagine if you had triplets.
I know. In Australia, it's a maximum of 2, and I think the majority of the time they'll only do 1. There's rare circumstances.
So we wouldn't have any octo mums in Australia.
No way.
No?
They're much more sensible than that.
Oh, my gosh.
So I had 2 miscarriages, and then we got to know, so we did our IVF in Alicante in Spain, and it's a really interesting place. It's this beautiful beachside town that has clearly a lot of medical facilities there because there's lots of IVF clinics and there's lots of plastic surgery and it's this really strange place. It's kind of like a second home to us. Like we know the people in the restaurants because we've been there so many times and the people in the hotels. And Lara, our liaison officer from Alicante, from this clinic, she feels like a family member. Like she's been through all of this with us. Like I think we're a little bit famous in their clinic for having such a bad run of things. And I remember talking to the head of the clinic after the second miscarriage and I said to him, what do we do now? Like, what do I do if the next round doesn't work? And he like made a pretend gun and put it into his temple and like,
no.
I was like, okay, that's your professional opinion there. Thank you.
Great.
I'm ruining their statistics as well, right? So they've got these statistics that say.
Right, yeah. So you weren't a good client.
No, I wasn't a good client. It was a lucrative client, but by this time we've spent almost $200,000 on all of this. Like it's
couple of $100,000 Australian.
Yeah, by the time you've done flights and medicine and IVF rounds. And
did at any point you feel like you were going to give up?
Yeah, at that point, that was it. And I said to Adam, I think we need to start thinking about how we design our life without children, and really did some soul searching, which I think is useful in hindsight anyway, because all of us have to go through that, whether you have kids or not. And you'd know this. When your child is grown and they leave home, there's a grief process because you've been a mum for so many years and then you have to redesign your life and you might end up doing a podcast.
Going through menopause. Writing a book.
So you have to do this internal growth anyway. We just had to do ours. I was in my early 30s when I was doing that instead of in my late 40s. So I think that journey had to happen for us and we were ready. We said, look, I think we can do this life without kids. And that's when I did my coaching certification to decide what I was going to do with my life and work that out. And then we were at round 9 and 9's not a very even number. And so Adam said, should we do one more round? And I said, okay, then let's just do one more. And they found, so same clinic, they said, well, we've got you a proven donor. So a proven donor is someone who has their own children and has donated and there's been live births.
So that's interesting. So your kids have got half siblings.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I know.
That's a whole other can of worms.
This is where the anonymity is quite interesting. There's no way to guarantee anonymity anymore because we have now, there's 2 websites. There's lots of websites. The 2 main ones for genetic and DNA testing and linking is 23andme.com and ancestry.com.
Yeah, so you can put your DNA in and they'll match you with if their siblings put theirs in, they'll find them.
Yeah, and so there's this incredibly powerful story that a girl who did this recently. If you want to read this, if you go to ginandzin.com, GINANDZIN.com. She's an American girl whose father passed away when she was 18. Her name's Jacqueline. And she, out of interest, was just putting her DNA onto, I think, 23andMe. And her cousin was on there and she looked at the results and she had people that she was related to that she didn't know and she wasn't related to her cousin. And she's like, how is that possible? She hadn't been told she was created using a sperm donor. And her social dad, her non-biological father, had passed away. And the grief for her, go through that and realise she's not genetically related to her dad. She says, and it's a beautiful read, she says it hasn't affected her love for her dad. And what she has found, though, is half siblings. And so it's fascinating that, and they've actually found the donor. They've tracked through.
Have they?
Yeah, they have, because they've put on a few different websites and you find, I think they found a niece of their donor who'd also put her DNA on. And she said, I think my granddad donated sperm back in the 80s, whenever it was. So there is ways, which it doesn't mean that person will want to speak to you. So there's no guarantee, but there's no guarantee of anonymity anymore.
Right.
You can't.
So they're wasting their time doing that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know why they're doing it, and I don't know that it'll change soon, but part of my mission is to ban anonymity of donation in the world, because I think our children don't deserve that. My children deserve a full view of their own identity.
When did you realise you'd made that mistake? When did it dawn on you that your children wouldn't know their medical story, their biological story?
Probably not until the last 2 years or so, until I had counselling through VARTA and really starting to talk with other donor mums and donor recipient mums and talking to the counsellors there. Like, we went to counselling in London, and I remember her saying to us, your child won't be able to connect with their own genetic history, but connect them to your story. So record things and write letters. And so Adam and I were really diligent with that. And we've
Doing your homework again.
We did our homework again. I've got beautiful videos around, it's called Rosie, Your Journey to Meet Us. And I've got Jack and Maggie, Your Journey. And we've got, you know, all our trips to Alicante and videos of me talking to the embryos, and they're really beautiful videos.
I bet you're glad you did that.
So glad I did that. And it depends who you're counselled by, because she didn't ever say to us, you might want to think about not doing this. I don't know that I would have listened even if she'd said that, but...
Do you wish she did?
Yeah. And Adam really struggles with me saying that because
you wouldn't have these kids.
I wouldn't have these kids.
Got.
And my kids are, like, seriously amazing. I know most mothers say that, but I think I've got gifted children. They're funny and they're kind and they're wonderful little kids. So saying that I wish we hadn't used an anonymous donor doesn't mean, I wish that they weren't around. I wish that they didn't have that problem. I was genetically linked to them. Like, I got cool kids. Like, I do wish they were, like, genetically mine, because I could take some credit for that. But I can't.
You can take credit for their upbringing. But does that something that crosses your mind?
Yeah.
So I'm not genetically linked to these kids. And does that make you feel sad?
Yeah. And it was interesting. When we first had Rosie, we were in Melbourne. Adam and I hadn't spoken about who we were going to tell and how we were going to tell people. And all our family knew, so we were pretty open. But beyond that, we hadn't really thought about it. And she was probably 4 months old, and we went to a dinner party and she was with us. And there was probably about 8 people there that were kind of my husband's work colleagues, so they weren't besties. And one of the girls was like, how come she's got brown eyes and dark skin? And I looked at Adam and he looked at me, and we both kind of fumbled through that, because I was ready to say, we used an egg donor, and Adam was just like, and so we
got the vibe not to say anything.
I got the vibe not to say anything. And we went home that night and I said, look, we need to talk about this. So I Googled, and that's how I found VARTA. And I spoke to Kate Bourne, who now I have a lot of connection with. She answered the phone that day, and I said, look, what do I do? How do we work through this?
Brilliant. Good on you for reaching out and getting help. There's such a message in that for people.
I needed a strategy.
Yeah.
I was like, this can't be good. And I still get it here in Hong Kong. People comment on how she does it. People don't tend to say she doesn't look like you. They say, she looks way more like her dad. And some people it's just a little bit confusing to people. So we are really open about it now. Like, I tell everyone, like, it's the fact I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it is my mission to raise my children with zero shame about how they are created.
Yeah.
And if I even have a hint of shame in me about how they're created, then
they'll pick that up, won't they?
And so we are really open. They've got the videos of their stories. So my kids know that in order to have a baby, you need an egg from a woman, sperm from a man, and a uterus to carry the child. And that could be 1 person, 2 person, 3 person. There's sometimes 2 dads, 2 mums, single mums by choice. There's all sorts of ways a family can be made.
You've been totally open about their story right from the beginning.
Yeah. And my tip is to start practicing it before they can speak, because then you get to practice. If you're waiting until they're 5 and then you're worried about how you're going to say it. I've had so much practice that I can tell a story in my sleep of how they were created. And I keep away from terms like a lot of the books will say a nice, generous lady gave her seed. You know, they do this weird, and I'm like, let's just use fact. Because we don't know she was nice and generous. We know nothing about her. It was like a lady gave her egg.
Yes.
She donated her egg. And so we use the proper terms. A lot of the kids' books aren't as direct as Adam and I are. So we're really clear, which is interesting because when my friend Penny was pregnant, she asked her who her egg donor was. So because she doesn't realise that that's not how every child is made.
Oh, how cute.
And so she said to me, the poor 4-year-old girl said, so how are babies normally made? And I said, penis goes into a vagina, deposits the sperm. And her poor little eyes just like flashed open. She went, "Good night, Mummy." We haven't talked about that one yet.
So cute. But, you know, when they're asking, they're kind of ready to know. So it's okay.
Yeah. And now I'm at the stage where I want to talk to her about genetics. The twins are still a little bit young for that, but I've just got a list of books now that I'm going to order on how do you talk to kids about genetics.
So it's Rosie 4 and
she's just turned 5.
And the twins are 3.
3.5.
Did you get hold of books about
there's
egg donor?
so many books. Yeah. There's so many books out there.
Was there some that you'd recommend that were awesome?
Look, I've got...
Or are you going to write your own?
Do you know what? I have talked about that.
Yeah.
I have thought about that as well. There's Mummy, Was Your Tummy Big is one. They're divided into different categories. Some is if you've used a sperm donor or an egg donor, or there's lots of different books. The one tip I have for people listening who want to think about the talking to their kids about it, there's the dcnetwork.org in the UK has these pamphlets called Telling and Talking, and they've got Telling and Talking for 0 to 7-year-olds, Telling and Talking for 7 to 14-year-olds. So there's an assumption you're going to tell. This is how you can do it for the particular age group. And up until about kids are 8, it's very building block approach,
of course,
information. So my kids don't understand the wider context of not being genetically related to me. When they're about 8, they probably will. And I just have to be open. I want to be so open that they can be sad about it or angry about it. And Adam and I talk about it all the time. We'll help you find her. Like, she's our donor as well. We want to find her. So we've got a plan of like all learning how to speak Spanish. So if we do meet her and she doesn't speak English, we'll be able to communicate.
And your kids may have a natural affinity for Spanish because it could be in their egg.
They're pretty good at Mandarin.
They're pretty good at Mandarin. That's pretty cool.
And we figure that technology, so Rosie's 5, so say she's curious about it in 10 years or so. Another 10 years of technology, things will be even more improved.
Massively.
And so we're just going to keep curious about it and open to it, and we'll help them find her if they want to.
Do you ever consider that they'll be like, oh, whatever, and we don't care?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is people who are like that. I'm part of a Facebook group that has donor recipients like me in there, adult donor conceived kids and donors. And there's one lone voice who says, I'm completely fine with it. I've never been interested.
Wow, that's really
and
interesting.
The rest,
everyone else is interested. So if percentage-wise, it would be a very low percent.
And a lot of the studies say that girls are more interested than boys. But we're going to stay open and be ready for whatever turns up.
Are you expecting some tricky questions as your kids get older then?
Not so much tricky. I'm pretty good you know how open I am. I'm really open about the body safety work I do. So we are all about facts around vaginas and penises and safe touch. And so we do a lot of really candid speaking with our children anyway. So this is just another piece of that.
Yeah. So it's just going to, as you said, progress or layer as they get older.
Varta's got some excellent videos of adults, donor conceived kids or teenage kids talking with their parents about what it's like to be donor conceived. And one of the videos that day I'd come home from the dinner party with Adam, Kate from Varta had sent me a link to some of these videos. They have a seminar called Time to Tell. It is sold out every year.
Really?
Sold out. And people fly in from all over Australia to come and adult donor conceived people talk, or parents like us. My husband went and talked 2014. I was supposed to go, but I was so sick and pregnant with the twins that Adam went and spoke about our story and showed them the video.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
And do you get people getting in touch with you and seeking advice and stuff?
Yeah. So I've coached a lot around this. My coaching business isn't for people who've used this, but I've had people contact me who've been surrogates, who've used egg donors, who've used sperm donors, and I coach them around it. So I'd never give advice on this, but people who do come to me for advice around egg donation, I always say, look, I've got a bias towards open. And actually I had a woman contact me the other day who said, I took your advice and we were going to use an anonymous and now we've used an open and she's 6 weeks pregnant. And so I think I changed someone's life. So there's
That's
that kid.
amazing.
Yeah, so there's a few people that everyone knows my view.
When we talk about open egg donation, does that mean that later on the children can get in touch with the mother or the donor?
Yeah. And it's interesting you say...
Yeah, because it's not the mother. Well, it kind of is the mother, but it's all about perception, isn't it?
This is one thing I wanted to talk about here because the language we have around this is so tricky.
Yeah, isn't it? I caught myself.
No, and you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like, depending on who you are, there's not an agreed language for the donor or for me. So I call myself a donor mum, as in I'm a donor recipient, but donors also call themselves donor mums. And so there's no agreed language. Mother is one of those terms that is so personal to our story that to tell me that the donor's the mother just gets me in my gut because I'm raising the child. But it depends on how you're using the term mother, because our donor is, so I've been saying to Adam, do we use the term genetic mother for her and biological mother for me? I don't want to downplay the role of the egg donor to the point where they think it's insignificant.
Yeah, sure.
But then I don't want to call her a mother now when my kids are 5 because that's going to confuse them.
Yes.
So at
and
some
especially
point,
potentially someone they'll never meet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
It's
I
not
want
like
them
they
to know
can
how
forge a relationship. Yeah.
No, and I hope one day they can. And so it's tricky. There's no real language here. There's no global terms for this stuff. And people get really passionate about it. Like people don't even want to use half sibling for half siblings because a sibling is someone who sits at your table and you fight with, and it's not. But I think we have to do what's in the best interest of the child. And if it serves my child to call our donor a genetic mother or a mother, then that's okay with me because I've moved past that ego part of it.
Great. So how do you work that out?
Oh
What
my
is
God,
best for your child?
Cry a lot. You really have to look at your own shame first and any indications that you're carrying any shame around this. So if you are a donor parent and you think you're not going to tell your child, have a think about what is getting in the way there and why you might not be telling them, because there's all these dark emotions come up here: fear, grief, shame. It's all shrouded in that. And we have to take a good look at ourselves to say, so that night when Adam and I weren't clear, we had a really big talk around what is our fear.
What was your fear? That you would be judged for not being whole or not being
judged. And I wrote a blog post on this ages ago that just get used to it because you'll be judged. There'll be people. Like I went to a party when Rosie was like 6 months to a friend's birthday party of her little kid. And the mother of one of the girls there, like she wasn't standing that far away from me. She's like, that's the one, donor eggs in Spain. And I was like, I can hear you.
Oh, no, really?
So I got really good at being okay with what we've done because you will get judged. There are people who are not going to agree with what you did or what we did, and that's okay. But we have to be okay with it.
Yeah.
So I've done some really good work recently on having a look and writing down my fears around this. And it's such hard work to do. But if you don't do it, it's just going to swill around in your mind and change how you parent. So my biggest fear was, what if they do think she's their mother and that I'm not? And I wrote it down and I just cried and kind of worked through it. And it probably took about 3 days for me to work through, like when they're old enough to comprehend what we've done, what if they never want to be in my life? And I sobbed and cried and spoke to Adam, and husbands are great. And he's like, that'll never happen. Working through your fears is like, what if it does? What if it does happen?
Worst case scenario,
Worst case
isn't it?
scenario. And if you can get comfortable with the worst case scenario, the fear just ceases to have control.
Oh, I love that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And so I wrote down, what if they disown me when they're older? And so where I got to was that is totally within their choice to do that. But I go back to, is it Stephen Covey, where he has like your circle of control, your circle of influence, and your circle of concern. So what was within my circle of control? The only thing I can control is that I will always consider myself their parent. The door will always be open. No matter whether they say I'm not their mother, I will always keep in contact and say, I'm here whenever you're ready to come back and talk, and you can talk about it and we can work through this and you can have every emotion that you want. But I always have a choice to consider myself their mother.
Perfect. And then your circle of influence is that you can love them and make them feel
that they can
that
belong
sense
here.
of family.
And do you know what's interesting? Being in Hong Kong has been really interesting. If you look at how close children here are with their helpers, who care for them every day, who sometimes share a room with them, who raise them, the bond between children and helpers isn't genetic, but it's powerful. And so connection for me isn't about genetics, although that's an important part of the picture in my children's family. It is about creating a space where my children feel like they can belong and they can come and be whoever they are, no matter what.
I think it's really great that you're parenting in an era where families come in all shapes and sizes, and there's adoption, and there's gay parents, and there's single parents, and there's donor parents, and there's IVF babies, and there's
single by choice and single not by choice, and
exactly.
all sorts.
There's everything, and there's mixed race families, and there's absolutely everything, and that we see that in the media, and we're seeing more of that. So I think it's really great for you and your kids that they're growing up, or your whole family's growing up in this society rather than when we were kids, when it was much more generic.
And the advice back in the 70s when sperm donation and egg donation really started to take off was not to tell anyone, and that was by the medical profession. So we've come a long way from there that it is now the norm for it to be open. I saw this wonderful video on Varta's website back when I was thinking about telling everyone about our conception, how we conceived our children. And it's a mother, I think her name's Karen, and she's got twins from embryo donation. And they are, I think, 14 at the time of the video. And the one girl on there, and she's really articulate, and she said, you know, they were sitting in biology class in high school and they're saying, this is how children are conceived. And she said she was at the back of the class going, oh, can I tell you, actually not all children are conceived that way. Let me tell you how I was conceived. So and that's what I want for my kids.
Yes.
My kids, I want them to be the most knowledgeable person in the room so they can say, well, actually that's one way for kids to be created, but let me tell you another way. And not to feel shame, but to feel proud of it, because this is how they were created. It's not who they are. They are donor conceived, but there's so much more than that. My aim is to give them so much information that they're the smartest ones in the room when it comes to this. And when someone says, well, she's not your mother, they have the information to be able to say, well, you could say that, but actually this is my story.
Brilliant. Oh my gosh, I love that.
I know.
And what do you think the greatest challenge is that you've faced in all of this IVF and egg donor journey?
Working through my grief. Probably the hardest.
Ruby, for infertility,
for the ease of it, for the genetic connection. Like I still long to be genetically connected to these three because they're just wonderful. And I sometimes just want to be Rosie because she's the super cool 5-year-old who knows lots of stuff and can speak Mandarin. I was like, oh my God, like I'd like to be her in another life. She's a really cool chick. And so that longing, I still have to kind of work through. And I'm always trying to plan ahead for the conversation. So it's an ongoing process. But I feel well armed. I'm a good problem solver and I go and find information, and there's a lot out there that you can actually find to help you start the journey. And books are really good to start the conversation, but also conversations with other people that have done the same thing. So we're moving back to Melbourne, and I have a community in Melbourne already, which is parents and families that have all used either sperm, egg, embryo donation. And we have like an annual picnic and all the kids are there and no one cares and they're all donor conceived. And I want my kids to be around other people so they don't feel like they're the only one. I tried to set up something in Hong Kong and no one was interested.
Why do you think that is?
There's still a lot of shame, I think, around the genetic side of it here. I could get very little traction with people being open about it here.
And I think if you have that sort of community for your kids, then that's going to help with their development of their identity and their sense of belonging, isn't it? So I think it's a good thing. Is that part of the reason why you've moved back? Or is that just an added bonus?
No, it's just an added bonus. And I keep in touch with them anyway. Mm-hmm. The really nice thing about the community in Melbourne is that when you get women together who've all used egg donation, we all have a story and it's all a deep story. Like no one chooses it as the first option. So we all have a story of grief that goes along with it. So this unspoken acceptance of each other and how we've created our families. So we're all very different, but we're also really connected.
So it makes you feel like you found your tribe.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's lovely, isn't it?
And they do regular catch-ups, and what they do is adult donor-conceived kids come in, and we're always learning because the kids are always growing and we learn from each other. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, is, and I hear mothers speaking of this who've got older kids, is when does it cease to become my story to share and when does it become my kids'? Because what if my children decide that they're not as open as I am or they don't want everyone to know? And one of the mothers in my donor group in Melbourne said she's got twins and one of them's open and one of them's not, and it's really tricky to navigate. He shouldn't be telling my friends this stuff. So that's all
you might have that to look forward to.
That's all ahead for me. So, but if I can raise them all without shame, I shouldn't think there would be a problem with who they tell and who they don't. And as long as they can be strong in their own stories.
Absolutely.
That'll give them the power to stand on their own 2 feet with it.
How do you think this whole journey's changed you as a person? Or has it?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely more compassionate and more empathetic. I think had Adam and I, when we first got married, fallen pregnant very easily, I'm not sure our marriage would be as strong as it is. We are unbreakable.
That's great.
Literally. Like there is nothing. Aww. I know, he's a good egg. Kaboom. A lot of marriages don't survive infertility. And
that's just because of the hormones, the pressure, the support you need to give. I mean, we don't even know you can't judge or guess, can you? But there's so many factors.
I think part of it is communication breakdown. My coaching niche when I first started coaching was for people going through IVF. And the number one thing that people wanted to talk about was, how do I talk to my husband about this? Or I had husbands saying, how do I talk to my wife about this? Whereas Adam and I'm a really good communicator. I teach it in leadership development spaces. Like it's something I'm really good at and passionate about. So I just applied that to how we were going to get through this. Like that first day when I got like 1 follicle or 2 follicles and I shut down, that was a big eye opener for me because I thought I can't shut down on this. I have to tell him how hard this is. And that was when we started really building. And I remember Adam saying, he had a really good analogy for it. He said, watching your wife or supporting your wife go through IVF is like being a boxer's trainer on the outside of the ring. He said, you're watching your boxer get the shit beaten out of them and you just got to stay on the sidelines. Cheering and motivating and wiping the blood off their face when they come to the sidelines and telling them to go back in.
Wow, that's such a cool analogy, isn't it? That makes sense.
He felt really helpless.
I'm sure. And I think many men do feel helpless when it comes to birthing and fertility and all of that. You know, even in labour, I think men can be like, I can't help.
Yeah, so our relationship's definitely better.
That's great.
Yeah.
And is there anything that, in hindsight, apart from obviously
not using anonymous,
not using anonymous donor, is there anything else that you would have done differently?
It's a good question.
It's a tricky question.
It comes back to the known donor. Like I would love if we could go and see our donor on Christmas and they go, oh, that's the donor. She's a really nice lady and you're my mum and
kids.
And it's not a big
the same
deal.
interests. And,
and I got the same eyes and that's nice and you can see that. That's probably the biggest thing, that if I could say that. And do you know what? Like I talked to Bess, what episode was Bess? I can't remember. She did an amazing episode.
Yeah, she did a great episode and it's episode 34. Anyway, it's called Human Dignity. I can't remember the episode.
So I messaged her the other day. I said, she's activated the activist in me. She's doing some really cool things in the LGBTQ space. And I'll be catching up with her to see what can I do with banning donor anonymity globally. Because
good for you.
If they can get gay marriage ticked off and legalised in Australia, then I'm sure we can make some headway with banning donor anonymity. There is enough people out in the world who care about this, but everyone's trying to do their own thing. Then no one's looking at it globally. But I think if we can get the collective voices together, the donor-conceived people, the recipient parents and the donors to say what is best for the children here, that we can start to change some laws. And, you know, they've done it in Victoria. And, you know, they've got MPs involved and it's so cutting edge, the stuff they've done in Victoria. I'll be talking to them.
That's so cool. And you're going back to live there.
And so I'll talk to them about what did they do and how can we start to change these laws across the world to make sure our children have full access to their identity.
Yeah, all aspects of their identity.
Yeah.
Looking back, what do you wish you'd known at the start of this journey, apart from...
Oh, my God, how much money it would cost. All my friends have really nice houses. I've got 3 beautiful children and no nice house.
So you didn't really realise how much it would... Oh, you didn't know you were going to go through 9, 10, 11.
No.
You did 11.
It was 11 all
It was 11 in the end.
Yeah.
So 10 and 11 were successful.
Yes, rounds 10 and 11. And I think she had 10 eggs, 7 were fertilised, and 4 went through to 5 days. And so out of that, you'd think you'd get 1 child, maybe 2. And we had 2, and we got 3. So we had 2 embryos put back in, which was when I conceived Rosie. And then we moved back to Melbourne, but we'd got an invite back to a wedding in France. And so we're like, oh, we're so close to Spain. We'll go and just put those last 2 back in. I remember the doctor saying to me, do you want twins? I was like, no, I don't want twins, but I've done enough IVF to know that that's probably not that realistic. And then we got, that wasn't an easy journey either. So we knew we'd fallen pregnant with twins fairly early on because you can test for it. Mm-hmm. And we got back to Melbourne. I was probably about 6 weeks. And this is going to get a bit graphic.
That's okay. We expect nothing less.
And
Jump ahead 13 seconds if you don't want to hear this, folks.
So I think I was 7 weeks pregnant going in for my first scan. And then the night before the scan, I had a full bleed, like I'd had a miscarriage. And so I remember Adam and I, so Rosie, she was 11 months at the time, and I said to Adam, look, maybe we're just going to have one child. And I said, why don't we go to the scan tomorrow and just get them to confirm the miscarriage? Like I'd lost so much blood that it was...
Sorry, can you just recap? Had you had 2 or 3 eggs put in?
Two embryos.
Okay.
The last 2.
Yeah.
And I knew I was pregnant with twins. And
then I thought
I was pregnant with twins just because my hormones spike really early and I was so sick. And then I had this huge bleed, and we remember lying there and just sobbing and, more grief. And then we went to the doctor and he's like, well, let's just find out what's going on. And he's like, baby number 1, baby number 2. And he's like, no, you're actually having twins. We were like, what the
Crikey. Better buy a Tarago.
So that was it. And
oh, my gosh. My sister went for a scan and she was told she was having triplets. She already had
awful.
2 kids and she went home freaking out going, oh, my God, no, we're going to have to buy Tarago. We're going to have 5 kids. And then later on went back for the next scan and they're like, oh, whoops, sorry, it's only 2. So then that's good psychology because you're like, oh, yay, twins.
The human body cannot cope with triplets.
Oh, my gosh, what a nightmare. Do you know anything about the legalities of egg donation in Hong Kong?
Very little. And I did try and research this, and it's really hard to find out what's legal and what's not. So what I did find was that it's illegal to sell and buy embryos or eggs or sperm in Hong Kong. And you can't reward the donor for the supply.
Oh, okay.
At
so
all.
it might be possible if it's voluntary.
Yeah. And I think it doesn't say anonymous is illegal. I couldn't find that. There was very little information around.
Do you have any resources that you can recommend to people who are thinking about going down the egg donation or even the IVF route?
Yeah, dcnetwork.org in the UK. So I go with Australian and UK because they're the most progressive. And varta.org.au, VARTA in Australia. And they've got loads of resources on there, like how to find an egg donor. The interesting question is when you've got excess embryos and you've finished having your family, what to do with them? Well, you've got a choice. You either pay for them to stay in storage until you're ready to decide, which can be a really long time for some people. And then you've got to decide, do they go to science? Do you throw them in the rubbish? Or do you donate them to another family?
People make any of those choices, do they?
That's really hard. Like really.
So with those 2 really cool, progressive resources, anybody can access them. You don't have to be in Australia or the UK,
absolutely.
do you?
Yeah. I just know them because I know people in those organisations, and you're going to have to work out what you want as a family. But my one thing that I will not stop saying is try and put yourself in the shoes of the child that isn't yet born. And that is so hard when you think there may never be a child.
Yeah.
So putting yourself in the shoes of a child that it breaks your heart to think of even existing because it may never happen is really hard. But I know that when those children come and I look at them and I think, gosh, I can't even tell you who that person is, that breaks my heart even more. Like I found something on anonymous donor regret.
Oh,
and that's definitely what I feel about it.
You had no idea you were going to feel this when you were going through the process.
Never even thought about it.
Wow.
We did have one moment when we were sitting in Spain. We were under this tree and I remember Adam saying, what about the children? We haven't really thought about that. And I think I just brushed it off.
Right.
And so we weren't really supported to work through this.
Is that because actually having the children was such a...
Oh, my God, I never thought it was going to happen.
Yeah, such a concept that you couldn't get your head around because you had so much grief. And, so in a way you're like, oh, whatever. Because
And in Spain they won't tell you any different because that's their model and that's their laws, but they are so behind. And, I love the clinic we went to and I love the experience, but the outcome is devastating. Like, yes, we've got children, but now I carry the burden of telling them that. Like, that's not on them. Like, they're thinking of their job is to get people pregnant. That's it.
What is the logic behind having anonymous egg donation or even anonymous sperm donation? What is the logic? Is it so that kids can't go back and try and get money out of them or knock on their doors?
Because you can cover that off with legal contracts and stuff like that.
So
I think it's just old thinking from the 70s and 80s where we thought it was best for the family if, like the stolen generation, best for the family if we take them and put them with white people. It was just old thinking. It came from a good place. We wanted the best for these kids. Didn't really think through from the perspective of the child. And there's a lot of shame. Like I actually was reading where this has been going on, sperm donation has been going on since like the 1800s. And
has it really?
The first time they did it, a doctor impregnated a woman using a syringe with one of the student medical doctor's sperm, but didn't tell her, like she was chloroformed out, or however you knock people out in the 1800s. So the husband knew, because they were suspicious that it was probably the husband's issue. And so they picked the best looking medical student, injected her with the sperm, and she got pregnant. But back then, through to the 70s and 80s, the advice was, don't disrupt the harmony of the family. Genetic testing has been the best thing for our industry. I think it's making the industry think about the bigger picture.
Will you put your kids in for genetic testing as children, or will you let them make this decision as adults? Here's a tough, tricky question.
And do you know what? My husband and I have different opinions.
And you're like, I want to find out now.
No.
Oh.
I think it's an ethical
minefield.
Yeah, I do. I think, do I have the right to take the saliva of my children and submit it to a website?
And see what you find
What I find.
Yeah.
I don't think we should.
That fits in with your whole body safety kind of philosophy, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Permission, right?
Yeah,
that's a good connection.
Yeah. Thank you. That'll be $500.
Yeah. Whereas my husband sees that it's doing a service for our children. And he might be right, but I think, what's the harm in waiting 10 years? The technology will have changed. They'll get to make that decision for themselves.
Absolutely.
And he can put his DNA on there and find out his own story. And so we've still got some conversations to happen.
Why is he adopted?
No, but curious about genetic, you get to, you never
because
know,
you can,
right?
You can find out loads of things that you never knew. Most people do, don't they? Find out all these different nationalities that are there that you don't know.
So this is, I think we're biologically wired to be curious about our history. And it was interesting, on that Gin and Zin blog, the girl wrote where the relative she found, which was the niece of her donor, was saying, you know, our family has this history and they've done these things. And she, as the donor conceived child, is like, can I claim that as is that my history? Because that's my genetic history, but it's not my history. And so which bits are claimable and which aren't? And
a very interesting debate, aren't they?
They're beautiful debates. And if we can have these debates in a way that we're open and compassionate. There's a lot of anger within some of the groups that I'm part of when recipient parents like me are asking questions around, do we tell, when do we tell? And adult donor conceived kids come in and they've been found out accidentally when a drunken aunt has decided to tell them, or they found out through ancestry.com and they found it in a way that's not healthy. They then have to undo their whole life. So if you find out at 33 that you were conceived using a sperm donor or an egg donor and you didn't know that, that's like one of the biggest trust issues there is.
Yeah.
Because what else have people lied to me about, and who knew and who didn't know, and why didn't anyone tell me?
Do you know anybody with this story, like personally?
No.
Just from reading?
Just from reading.
And what seems to be the impact on many of them?
A huge amount of distrust and broken relationships. A lot of people,
identity crisis, yeah.
Whether these journeys in different ways, but there's overwhelming evidence for starting as early as possible. Adam and I said we never want our kids to remember being sat down and told that they're conceived using an egg donor, that it's always been their story and they've always known, and there's no undoing. They didn't have a personality and an identity before we told them and a different one after. They've always known, and it's who they are.
And that fits with my friends who have adopted a baby, and he came into their family when he was 11 months, and they've created a book and they've put his journey and the foster family and all of that, and we're all in it, and it's beautiful. And they read that with him all the time, and so he will absolutely know he was adopted. He already knows, even though he's only 2.
Which that tells me they've worked through any shame they had about the decision they made.
Absolutely. I don't think shame was ever a factor,
Absolutely.
actually.
And
I imagine.
I know people who've adopted who don't tell their kids, and there's shame there.
That's a really weird thing. From my point of view, it's weird to think in this day and age that people wouldn't tell.
Yeah. The thing is, there's no stats, right? The people who aren't telling are the people not even contributing in forums or attending time to tell seminars. We're already preaching
in the sand.
Yeah, we're preaching to the converted. And it's so shame in my work, so certified in the work of Brené Brown, is the intensely painful feeling that we're flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And the short answer to shame is that it's the fear of disconnection. And I think that really lends itself well to this. Like, what if my child disconnects?
Well, that's what you were talking about, your greatest fear. Are your children disconnecting from you because of this?
The problem with secrets is if you're going to keep this secret, you need to not tell anyone. Because if I tell you and you accidentally tell someone else and someone says when they're drunk, so if you're going to keep the secret, you can't tell anyone. And that is the heaviest burden that anyone could ever carry.
Absolutely, isn't it? And that comes back to Brené Brown's work about owning your story and being open about what you've been through and what you've experienced. And it's going to make you feel freer, and it's going to help others to own their story as well.
I think that, I run workshops, which the Rising Strong process, which is from Brené's work, which is how do you pick yourself up after an emotionally difficult experience and keep going and kind of rebuild yourself. And I have this vision that if we could get adult donor conceived people in the room with donor recipients, with donors, and we all work through our Rising Strong stories together, we may not be related to each other, but we can each learn from our stories. That I'm learning so much from hearing from donor conceived adults. There's this wonderful girl in the group that I'm in who is so generous as a donor-conceived adult. And I messaged her offline and said, your responses are wonderful in this group and you do it with such compassion. And she said, look, pushing people into my way of thinking is never going to work. If I can gently nudge a few parents to tell their children earlier, then the world's a better place. There's no point hammering people about it. If we can be kind and compassionate. And so
was she told late in life?
She was told. Again, she was another person who found out after her social dad had died. So she said, I had the grief of him dying and thinking he was my dad. Then I found out I was donor conceived. So then I had to re-grieve that again. It's complex.
Complicated. So complicated.
There's many more stories on the sperm donor side, because you can donate sperm every day for a year.
Most guys at uni do it for $20 a week.
So this is exactly right. And
there's so many people out there that might have multiple kids.
Yeah, 50 or 60 donor siblings, whereas with egg donation, there's probably a maximum of maybe 6 kids that are half siblings to my kids.
And how does this work now? We're becoming a global society and they're all going to meet and mingle and maybe date each other when they're older.
Problem, right?
Ugh.
Yeah. So this is it. So if we can have full transparency,
that won't be a problem.
It won't be a problem.
But then that doesn't help this generation, does it, that are coming?
And there's no one governing the industry. Like, is it a human rights issue? Like, where do you even start with this? I'm going to go pick Bess's brain and see where do we start with this. VARTA, I'm going to talk to them in Melbourne and see they've managed to change the law in Australia. How do we start to use that model? So they've got a system now where they have a donor linking system where if you were donor conceived, you can go to VARTA and they will find out who the donor is. They don't put you directly in touch with the donor. They'll contact the donor and say, the children that was born out of your donation wants to be in contact. Do you want to be in contact? So they act as an intermediary. That has to be the model going forward in Spain and in other countries, because our clinic has both of our information. So we're now in a position, how do we make contact with them, not to unnerve them because it's a legality, but how do we start to educate them around this using the model that they've done in Australia?
You're kind of hopeful that you will be able to at some point find your children's egg donor.
I've got all sorts of weird ideas around how we could do it, because
stalking around.
Well,
stalking around Spain looking for people that look like your kids.
I think put a big picture of the kids on a bus stop. Do you look like this child?
You'll have 25 people get in touch hoping for money.
Yeah, I think there's got to be ways, and especially with DNA and bringing together these organisations like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, I think we will. And there's the donor sibling registry in the US. That's one of the first places that really started linking siblings. I hope we will. And I got asked, what if she doesn't want to speak to us? And absolutely, that's she has a choice
Same
to
with
do that.
Adoptive parents. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah,
but I want
biological parents who adopt their kids out and all of that. You still, many people still want to go through that journey just to see what if.
And I want to see her. And it's funny because when we were in the clinic on the day that she donated, there was a woman who left when Adam went in to donate his sperm. And she was a really cool young chick with like a tat and some cool earrings. And I was like, in my mind, I have these fantasies that she's the donor and she's really cool and hip.
Well, that'd be ironic if it was. That'd be like freaky.
It's cool.
Yeah.
I hope we will find her. And we've got to learn Spanish in case she can't speak Spanish. And
can't speak English.
Sorry. So we have to learn Spanish in case she can't speak English. And
Exactly.
It's just easy to have someone you know.
I know.
Just way easier. Like if I could go, yeah,
but that
Jules.
could open up a whole new can of worms.
Yes.
That you just don't
right?
know. Yeah.
So, and that's where this is problematic because we think that would open up a can of worms for me as the adult. It's not about me.
No,
and that's
it's about
irrelevant.
the kids, yeah.
Because that won't open up a can of worms for the kids. That actually makes their life more simple. And so we have to get away from this. What's best for the adults? What's best for the donor is for them to be anonymous. Well, that's not the point. What's best for the kids? And that's the bit that hasn't really kind of tipped over into other parts of the world.
Hopefully that'll start to resonate, especially just by doing this kind of thing and getting the word out there.
I love
and people
talking
listening.
about this.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
The more people who know about these issues.
It's so important.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for anybody? I mean, obviously we know that you believe in open donation, non-anonymous, but what other advice would you have for people who are thinking of going down this egg donor route or the IVF route?
Do your homework. Find a counsellor or a coach who is trained or has experience in this. So through your IVF clinic, or you can Google counsellors who support people through IVF and get support.
Yeah, don't just go in on your own and then go straight to egg
we did that.
follicle harvesting and stuff.
In Australia, you're given a counsellor. Different countries have different laws.
Sure.
But I think if you're in a country that doesn't, find someone who can help you work through it so you can stay connected to your partner as you go through this, or just so you have it's all information. You need the facts. You need to know what impact your decisions are going to have. I think when you're going through IVF, there's always 3 buckets. Time, so depending on how old you are, money, how much cash you've got, and your emotional capacity. So if you think of it in those 3 kind of stages.
And you've got to keep replenishing those buckets.
Absolutely.
Oh, I like that as well. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
I used to use that in my coaching, and most of my clients, time isn't an issue if you're using egg donation because it's the age of your donor.
Yeah.
They can get a 60-year-old menopausal woman pregnant.
Can they?
Yeah. So if do you want another child?
No.
Yeah. Because there's been.
I need to be in bed at 8 o'clock every night.
Yeah,
I don't want another kid.
Yeah, but they can do that because it's the egg quality and the embryo quality, not the uterus.
Yeah.
So they can fake a uterus into accepting an embryo. So time isn't an issue if you're using egg donation. Money's always, you either have it or you don't, or you're working towards it. And then the emotional stuff is the stuff I work on, which is how do you pick yourself back up and keep going? How do you work through the grief? How do you understand your fears and explore those? And how do we learn about shame and being able to work through that in a productive way so we can move through it instead of being gripped by it?
What is your advice for people to deal with their grief and disappointment and the whole ups and downs of the journey? Because it's rarely a smooth sailing journey, isn't it?
Talk to someone.
Get help again, yeah?
It doesn't have to be a counsellor or a coach, but talk to someone who is good with empathy, someone who's going to listen and not judge. Like I had a lot of people when I'd say early on that I was struggling with who to tell and how my kids would think about this when they're older. A lot of people just want to make you feel better and they go, it'll be fine. They're not the people I needed. I needed someone to sit there and say, what's that like?
I think you mentioned the Facebook forums and these different chat rooms and chat groups and getting involved in them. I mean, they're great support, aren't they? And you can really connect with people all over the world who have had the same experiences or been through something similar, and you can get a lot of support in that way. We're so lucky to be so globally connected.
Look, some of the groups I'm in aren't an easy place to be because you do have really strong opinions. So you have to be a little bit robust being in there and not take it all personally.
Well, that's life, isn't it? You've got to have a bit of resilience and robustness to get through the criticisms that you face from people and the judgment, because sometimes people just can't help themselves.
People are going to judge no matter what we do. What I learned about judgments is that if I'm only susceptible to judgments where I'm already judging myself. So if I'm 100% okay with my decision to bottle feed, then judge away. Like that's okay. The same relates to this. If I'm 100% comfortable with the way that my family was created, you judge away, but this is what we chose to do and we're okay with that.
Yeah, exactly. Finally, what's your greatest joy in being a mother? What do you love the most?
I'm really good at it. I'm a project manager by background, so it's like a big old project to manage.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of the work I do around owning our stories, and I think I'm starting to realise that being able to do that work as my kids get older and help them hold space for the emotions that they have. Like the work I do through Brene Brown, like that has changed how I parent. And I think that my kids will be in a good position to be able to, I just got these amazing books this week from Jay Sanders, who writes all the body safety books. She's got some new books on resilience and talking about feelings, and they're wonderful. Her books are amazing.
Do you use them in your coaching?
I use them with my kids. Empower to Educate Publishing is their company. And so books like No Means No and My Body, What I Say Goes, they've also got new books around. So one's called Resilience, and it's about this little girl and how does she pick herself back up after she's fallen down and how do we build that. And then the feelings one is really great. So it talks about noticing other people's feeling, but recognizing yourself. Where do you feel it in your body? And then these beautiful pages, which is your feeling as big as a mountain, as little as a button, or as big as a chair? And going through that with my kids, like Rosie was in a stinker of a mood yesterday and she's like, it's as big as a mountain. It's bad. And then today she's like, I'm like, what's that like today? She's like, it's a little button today. And so teaching the kids that feelings are fluid and not to get stuck in them because you're not going to be there forever. That's what I'm proud of as a mother. Like giving kids, like if I'd have known that as a 3-year-old, like amazing. We can often get stuck in these emotions that feel so heavy and dark. But my kids are learning that they move and you will move through them.
They do, and that's a beautiful lesson for everyone, isn't it? To remember you're not always going to feel as terrible as you feel in the moment.
Absolutely. So I think that's what I'm proud of is being a mother and teaching them these skills. So books are incredibly important and also my coaching skills really helpful.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, I love being a mum. I'm so glad we did it. And Adam's a really good dad.
Yeah.
I'm really glad. So
no regrets looking back, given it was such a long and difficult journey?
No regrets.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So again, other than the anonymous part of it, but other than that, like we were persistent and we would have.
Now you've got a beautiful family.
Yeah. And now Adam's talking about adopting. I was like, hang on a second. Can't quite cope with the 3 I've got. But
is he serious?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
Yeah.
Would you?
He does a lot of like sitting there and going, just look at what we created. How cool is their family?
Like
we do
great.
a lot of that. So yeah, it's awesome.
Oh, that's lovely. Rebecca, if people want to get in touch with you or they'd like to follow your blog or just seek out advice, how can they do that?
So I have a personal blog around donor conception and it is www.alloutofeggs.com. And that's just my ramblings about the kind of stuff we've been talking about today. And then my workshops that I do based on the work of Brene Brown is www.livebraveworkshops.com. I'm on Facebook, Rebecca Hopkins, find me there.
So there's lots of ways that people, if they want to get in touch with you for any sort of support around IVF or egg donation or body safety or vulnerability or owning their story or having coaching, grief, shame, any of that, you'll be there ready to support.
Yeah, so I've got a page on Facebook, which is Live Brave Workshops.
Cool. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Jules.
Informative, educational, inspiring, empowering conversation, and I would expect nothing less from you.
Thanks for having me, Jules.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming, Rebecca. Hong Kong Confidential is brought to you by Teresa's Turkish Towels. Teresa imports the finest 100% Turkish cotton towels that dry very quickly, making them perfect for Hong Kong's humid climate. Say goodbye to the traditional smelly and stinky towels and try the colourful and fresh selections available online or in Teresa's Wan Chai store. Use the promo code CONFIDENTIAL online or mention this podcast when you visit in person to receive $100 off your entire order when you order 2 or more towels. With 100% satisfaction guaranteed or your money back, the only thing you've got to lose are the musty smells that permeate traditional terry towels. Visit www.hkturkish.com in order to get the address and directions to Teresa's semi-hidden location. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.